Good everybody, good Yontif, Gamar Tov. So happy to have all of you here. We have prepared 10 times more material than we're going to have time to cover. So hopefully, as the afternoon moves along, I'll be able to make some shifts because we do want to get at least close to the end to make some observations. So I'm going to begin. I don't know how many of you know Stephanie Carlson, our education director, with some fancier title than that I can never remember. So we're going to start off with her, and we're going to do sort of a question and answer, and hopefully I can answer the questions that she's going to ask.
So it's good that we started with this idea of questions. Good afternoon, everyone, because we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Reform Zionism and the history of Reform Judaism, and about how Zionism and Reform Judaism are sort of two answers to the same question. But before we do that, we're going to go back in history quite a little bit, and so we're going to start pre-Enlightenment, and just if we maybe give a little context about what was happening before all of these big developments that we're going to talk about.
Okay. So first of all, I think Jews operate with the misconception that Jews have always been Orthodox. The fact is that there has always been an organized Orthodox Judaism, but just because there was an Orthodox organized Judaism doesn't mean that all Jews practiced and were fervent and went to shul 3 times a day, etc. So when we're talking about this, I want you to understand that what Reform Judaism is going to represent at some point is an organized way to be Jewish without being Orthodox, whereas before, if you weren't Orthodox, you just didn't practice. I have a cute story I'll tell you real quick. It's not in the books, okay? It's not on the... The professor that was in Israel the year that I went to Israel had been an Orthodox Jew his whole life. He came to the Hebrew Union College, taught Talmud, and the year that I was in Israel, he happened to be the professor in charge of the school that year. And so he told us the story that after many, many, many years, he went back to the little shul in Brooklyn that he had been a part of for many, many years, hadn't been there in years, had been teaching at a Reform seminary, and one of his old buddies says to him, why, Dr. Tepfer, he says, what are you doing here? He says, well, it's Yom Kippur, I'm coming to daven. He said, yeah, but I thought you gave up Orthodox Judaism. He said, no, I'm still an Orthodox Jew. He said, well, what kind of Orthodox Jew are you? He said, sinning. Okay, so with that in mind, if you go back to the period in the Middle Ages, Jews were guests in the lands that they lived in. Their tenure was totally dependent on the king or the suzerain or whoever was in charge of the world that the land that they lived in. And remember that all the things that people measured wealth by, Jews were not allowed to do. They couldn't own land. They could not be part of the guilds. And so that's why Jews were forced into all kinds of businesses like money lending, like retail business, and actually eventually even international trade once 1492, that era with people being able to travel around the world. So with Jews unable to do that, one of the things that they were forced to do was to live in ghettos. They weren't formally called, but like ghettos. They lived apart, they lived separate. And there was a constant presence of anti-Semitism, in large part, as many of you know, due to teachings of the church at that time. Of course, that has changed to some degree, but at the time it wasn't. And each religious community, including Jews, had its own set of courts. In our case, there were courts that were run by the rabbis. And in fact, the synagogues were what's the word I want? Subsidized by the state because you paid taxes, and part of your taxes went to support the church or the synagogue or whatever religious institution existed in your community. I want to mention one thing about Israel at this point, which is The question is, what role did Israel play in Judaism at that point? After all, it had been, since the destruction of Masada. And the answer is that Jews prayed every day, 3 times a day, in their prayers for the coming of the Messiah, which meant the restoration of Israel, and Klal Yisrael, the whole community of Israel, being gathered together once again in Israel with the third temple potentially being built. So that's the role that Israel played. Nothing organized. It was just in the Jewish prayer book and had been for over 1,000 years.
So that's a really apolitical view of Israel, and the view of politics in general and the political role of Jews really changed dramatically as the ideas of the Enlightenment gave forth to a great event that was a turning point in Jewish history and in our history, and that being the French Revolution. So do we want to say more about how the ideas of the Enlightenment through the French Revolution and through the political changes that came with that, how that started to change Judaism?
Yeah, the truth is the French Revolution is extremely pivotal in what happens not just in Reform Judaism. The French Revolution changes the world. When we talk about the Enlightenment really grows out of the French Revolution. The ideas that led to it and then from it are what we call the Enlightenment, okay? One of the things that grows out of the French Revolution is the opportunity of Jews to be citizens, not just guests, but citizens with all kinds of rights. Some of you may have heard of a man named Moses Mendelssohn, probably the first really successful, if you will, in terms of intellectual life. One of the great intellectuals of his day. He was Jewish, of course. He's Felix Mendelssohn's either grandfather or great-grandfather. I forget. I think it's a grandfather. I heard a cute story about him, by the way, from Rabbi Stahl in San Antonio. We had lunch earlier this year. He tells the story that there was a lot of conversion, by the way, after the French Revolution. The Jews walked away once they were no longer forced, once they could be citizens and they could walk away. And he was having a conversation with this fellow, and you have to know that Moses Mendelssohn was a hunchback physically. He had that disability. And this fellow said to him, well, I used to be Jewish. And Mendelssohn, yes, and I used to be a hunchback. So one of the outcomes of the French Revolution is people became very dissatisfied with orthodoxy. The Orthodox community was not happy with Mendelssohn, with his translation of the Bible into German. There was a time when Jews were actually asked by the French government to answer certain questions, proving that Jews could be Jews and be loyal to the state that they lived in this case France or Germany. And so there's an actual document that we still have that shows how important it became for Jews to be able to not just be citizens, but have to justify to the authorities that they could be good citizens and good Jews. And it was Napoleon who put together this assembly who came up with the answers to these questions. And as a result of that, that document sort of came to define how Jews could be citizens and still be Jews, but not Orthodox Jews, because the people answering these questions were not Orthodox Jews. Okay.
So as this idea of Jews as full citizens of the places in which they lived, as the ideas of the French Revolution spread, and as Napoleon spread the French Empire, this idea of Jews as full citizens also began to spread. And it was really once this idea of Jews as citizens reached Germany that the roots of what we now think of as Reform Judaism really started to take hold. What happened there that made that happen?
Okay. A lot of people don't think about this in these terms, but you know that Temple Emanu was formed in 1944. We'll talk about the story of how later. That's not the point I want to make at this moment. The point I want to make is that Temple Emanu-El was founded by lay people. It was not founded by a rabbi. The rabbi who became the rabbi of this congregation, as many of you know, was in World War II. He was in Asia, I think in Japan at the time. So he was not here. He did not form this congregation. They formed the congregation and wrote to the rabbi and asked him to come and be their rabbi. Now, he had been a Beth Israel. They knew him, but the point is the congregation was formed by lay people. The first Reformed synagogue in the history of the world was formed by a layman. He was a German businessman by the name of Israel Jacobson. He was a fairly well-to-do gentleman, and he decided that he wanted to create a synagogue where Jews could come together and they would be able to be Jews without being restricted by a lot of the constraints, so to speak, of Orthodox Judaism. And so some of the things that happened was that they created a school, and they would hold services not just in Hebrew, but also in German. The services were abbreviated. All of this should sound familiar to you if you know the difference between a Reform and an Orthodox worship service. A weekly sermon offered by speakers, often not in German. German Jews didn't speak Yiddish, by the way. That was an Eastern European phenomenon. Often speaking in German rather than in Hebrew. They added the organ to their worship, okay? And eventually choirs of mixed gender. They started confirmation services instead of bar mitzvah, because that way they could include girls in the process. The first bat mitzvah wasn't until the 20th century, the daughter of the man who founded Reconstructionist Judaism. The Orthodox community, the organized Orthodox community, basically the rabbis, they took great exception to what was happening. Needless to say, they objected to what was going on. They referred to Reform Jews as Karaites. If you look back in Jewish history, you'll find out that's not a very nice thing to say. The central objection, of course, they had was that what Reform Judaism, what these rabbis, these new Jews had given up, was the authority of the Talmud. When we say Judaism today, we don't mean biblical Judaism. What we mean is, traditionally, when we say Orthodox Judaism, it's not biblical Judaism. It's rabbinic Judaism, which is what you find in the Talmud. And that's all the laws about how you should pray and what you should eat and when you should go to sleep and when you should get up and what do you do and how do you do it. And that's what this Reform community said, look, that just doesn't work anymore. We don't live in that world anymore. And so now that we are able to be members of society and we want to be part of the world in which we live, we want our worship services to reflect who we are and how we live. In 1842, there was something called the Society of Friends of Reform that was formed in Frankfurt, Germany, and was formed around 5 different principles, and I wrote them down so that you could know what I'm talking about. 1, Judaism is capable of continuous development. Think about that, continuous development. Now, while Judaism had obviously developed from the Bible to the Talmud, once the Talmud takes hold, the only development that takes place from that is the refining of the Talmud. They're saying develop beyond that. Number 2, the observance of ritual, dietary, and other such laws is no longer required. Well, that's the exact opposite, of course, of what Rabbinic Judaism and the Talmud is all about. 3, they no longer found circumcision to be mandatory. That, of course, is no longer true and wasn't. That was what they wrote. That one didn't hold, as a matter of fact. Of course, the Talmud is not authoritative, is one of the things they said. And they reject the idea of the Messiah, which will who will come and lead Jews back to Palestine. So they completely rejected that idea, and I want you to hold on to that as we move forward, okay? That is the first time okay, in 1842, that any mention of the idea of Israel not being something that Jews are tied to was ever written. The Orthodox and other Reform leaders thought the platform was too extreme, okay, and so there was another one that was written after that one, and then society identified which changes needed Judaism to modernize. Now, can I have slide 5, please? Okay, can you see that? All right, so, all right, this is, so this slide shows you how the group who was trying to make their changes to Jewish practice, how they thought. Now, I'm not going to read it, but I want to show you something. Can I have the other mic on, please? Ask him. I need the hand mic on for a minute. Doo-doo. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so I don't want to go through the details, but I want you to notice, okay? Here's the situation in Orthodoxy. Here's why Reform needed changes. So the important thing here is synagogue worship, belief in the Messiah, which is part of the whole Israel thing, okay? The religious status of women, Sabbath and holiday observance, Jewish marriage and divorce laws, Jewish mourning customs. Are there more on this list? Is there? Okay. So if you have the time while I'm talking, just take a look at what they're talking about. What I want you to realize is that if you were to talk about Reform Judaism today, with the exception of, and by the way, even including a good part of this, you would find that still defines Reform Judaism today. Most of it still applies. All of these things, there are two things, I thought about a second one, by the way. There are two things in Reform that have changed over the years. One is Israel, because you know where Reform Judaism, this temple as an example of it, you know where Reform Judaism stands on the state of Israel. We are supportive of the founding and the existence of the state of Israel, okay? That is a change from before. And the other is the increase of traditions and customs and rituals in Reform Judaism, which in order to establish themselves, it's sort of like thesis, synthesis, antithesis, synthesis. Initially, Reform Jews wanted to get away from all of that. So yarmulkes disappeared, taluses disappeared, all the rituals disappeared. You, of course, know that over time, a lot of that has come back. But the important thing to note here is that when we talk about Reform Judaism, we're talking about a movement that started in the late 17, early 1800s, and with not that many changes, still sort of defines who we are. Okay, let's go to here.
Okay.
One more thing. Okay. It just dawns on me. She made a statement that I was supposed to clarify and didn't. She made the statement that Reform Judaism and Zionism were like exact opposite reactions to the French Revolution, and I never explained that because that will make the whole Israel thing more clear, and I apologize for that. I should either wear my glasses or print things bigger. So here's the thing. Once the French Revolution took place, it wasn't just Jews who gained rights, okay? The people of France, I'm going to use France as an example, people of Germany, people of France. Once the French Revolution takes place, the idea that citizens have rights, remember egalite, fraternite, whatever it is, the sense that individuals have rights beyond, everything doesn't come from the king. And so the French and the Germans began to develop a sense of national pride, unlike anything that we had seen before, because they now had an opportunity, because of the beginning of what we call democracy, gave the individual a right, the ability to participate. Jews were part of that, okay? So two things. Reaction number one is Reform Judaism. Hey, I'm a German, I'm French, I live here, everybody else gets to be a part of it. I want to do my part, and I want to be like everybody else. And so you cast off a lot of the things that make you different. The other reaction among Jews was, well, heck, if the French can have their country and the Germans can have their country, why can't we have our country? And that's where Zionism begins, because by the middle 1800s, you already have groups of Jews going back to Israel with the express intent of creating the state, a Jewish homeland, a Jewish country, as early as I would say within 10 years of the beginning of Reform Judaism, you have people going back, Germans, Jews, going back to Israel, going to Israel to help establish a Zionist state. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we're going to skip the next chart, gentlemen, and go to, so early Zionism, as you said. So the first Zionist Congress happened in 1897, and early Zionism really starts to take root and flourish in Europe. Reform Judaism, however, really doesn't find its feet until it crosses the Atlantic and becomes American Reform Judaism. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that split and how Reform Judaism finds its feet in the United States?
Sure.
Okay.
That's what my notes say I'm going to do, so I'm going to do it. Okay. So, Reform Judaism never took hold in Europe the way it took hold in America. That's just, the numbers indicate that, okay? There was something called the World Union for Progressive Judaism, but it's an outgrowth of American Reform Judaism. It's the sort of an organizing organization of Reform synagogues around the world, but it really grew out of the desire of American Reform Jews to see the Jews every place have the opportunity to practice as Jews. So why does Reform Judaism take off in the United States in a way that it does not take off in Europe? First of all, we are a liberal democracy, okay? There is no history of the church, the state church. In other words, there's never been an official church of the United States of America, whereas in each of the European countries, there was always the church state. So there's no history of defining you in a way by your religion in any political or legal way. Jews in America always enjoyed full citizenship from the very, very beginning. Not that there wasn't anti-Semitism, don't get me wrong, but comparatively none. Anti-Semitism itself was unfashionable here. If you read the documents of the founding of America, you know all about that. And the American Jewish community was still fluid because there was no state support of the Catholic religion, the Baptist religion, or the Jewish religion, as there had been in Europe, where all the money went to the Orthodox congregations. Here, there's no such thing. If you have a congregation and you need money, the money comes from the people who belong to it. There is no state-sponsored religion whatsoever, and as a result of that, you don't have any money that's going to flow to one way of practicing Judaism as opposed to the other. Now, just as had happened in Germany, Reformed Jews began to have conferences where they would begin to create a sort of a unified body of expression of who they are and what they believe, okay? So on slide 9, is that what that one is up? Okay. What you see here, I forgot I got to take the mic. Okay. What you see here is 1869. Where did it go? Did I step on something? The slide went away.
Yeah, I think you stepped on it.
Did I step on something? I bet I did.
So sorry about that.
No, no. Oh, I did step on something. All right, so you see, as early in America, as early as 1869, there were Reformed Jews gathering together to say, this is who we are, this is what we believe. And again, I don't want to read all of the things, but look at Judaism's God concept, resurrection and immortality. You see how more refined this is becoming? They're being more and more specific about what they believe and what they don't believe and defining it, okay? The belief in the Messiah. Now we have specifically something about Palestine, which we only had as an adjunct of the Messiah issue before. You have, who are we as a people? What is our mission? Social justice, Jews participating in the broader community to make things, there was no possibility for that in Europe. So you can really begin to see that as early as 1869, Reformed Jews gather together, or rabbis really, come together to try and make expression of how they feel about these issues. Now, I want to check my notes on something, okay? All right, hold on. One more thing. I lost my place here. The thing I want to begin with now is here. This, called the Columbus Platform, this is really what sets things in motion in the United States that eventually gives rise to the change in Zion, that sets the stage for the change. Okay. Note the date of the Pittsburgh Platform and the Columbus Platform. Okay. In particular, look at this. A return of the Jews to Palestine is not sought. Okay? 1937. All Jews are obliged to aid in the upbuilding of Palestine as the Jewish homeland. What happened to change that? 1933. Right? Hitler. That's really what caused the history of Zionism in the Reform movement to change, because of how it impacted all of world Judaism. Okay? So if you look at the 1885 platform, when the time came to change, when this changed from here to here, it was a vote of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. How many votes did it pass by?
One.
One vote at the Central Conference of American Rabbis is what changed the position of Reform Judaism. One vote, okay? And that vote, in many ways, if you were just to follow it, is what led to the founding of this temple, and to the whole change in Reform Judaism. So
Never think that one vote can't matter. So you mentioned 1933 as a pivotal point. And as the rise of nationalism and as the rise of Nazism happened in Europe, as you said, the stance in the United States changed, right? And so we went from a situation where that one vote counted, where that one vote created dramatic change, to a place where the Jews in the United States started to see what was happening in Europe and started to question this idea that had sort of been the underpinning of Reform Judaism about Jews are not exiles, Jews are full citizens, and therefore we don't need to return to Palestine, or we don't need to return to Israel. And that groundswell really started to change in the late 1930s and early 1940s. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about how Ben Emmanuel comes onto the scene there?
Sure. One of the organizations that was formed as a result of the 1937 change was called the American Council for Judaism. Have you ever heard of that? Anybody? It actually still exists. I still get a mailing from them about 2 or 3 times a year. I don't know why I'm on their list, but I am. Anyhow, so the American Council for Judaism was formed by a group of Reform rabbis who basically said, we disagree with the change in the position of the Central Conference of American Rabbis and the Reform movement. We completely disagree with that. And so they formed an organization to make formal statements. And their objection was, going all the way back to the beginning of Reform Judaism, we are citizens of the country that we live in. I didn't quote to you one of the statements that was made along the way when Reform Judaism was founded in Germany. One of the statements was, let me get it right, Germany is my Palestine, Berlin is my Jerusalem, my synagogue is my temple, which, by the way, is why most Reformed synagogues are called temple rather than our official name is Congregation Emanu. I don't know if you know that, but we all call it Temple Emanu. That's why so many Reformed congregations are called temple, because it grows out of that statement. Okay. So these rabbis who formed the American Council for Judaism, they're in very much the same place. Okay. They're saying, look, we are American. We are American citizens. We may be Jewish by religion, but by nationality we are American, okay? And we don't want to support or participate in any way in the promotion, creation of a place for Jews to go. Certainly not as an official legal state. Many of the members of Beth Israel were actually active members of that organization. It was formed by rabbis. It was not only rabbis who were members. And at one point, Beth Israel passed something called the Basic Principles. Now, I want to be clear about this. This is not where Beth Israel is anymore. This is all history. So this is not a negative statement. I'm not criticizing Beth Israel in any way. Their rabbi is a dear friend of mine. I know a lot of people. So don't take this as anything negative other than it's history, okay? I got attacked once for telling this story that I was saying bad things about Beth Israel. It's not true, okay? So anyhow, they formed this, they created this document called the Basic Principles. And remember, this is 1943 or 4. What's going on? Where are Jews? Jewish men, they're overseas with everybody else, fighting for democracy, trying to make the world a safe place for democracy, okay? And this piece of paper says that if you want to be a voting member, not a member, a voting member, then you have to sign this piece of paper which says basically that you're not a Zionist, okay? You could be a member, but you couldn't be a voting member, okay? I have to tell you as a sidebar to that, I have asked so many members of Beth Israel, whom I know, who were around at that time, do you remember signing that? And do you know of anyone who was ever asked to sign that? And I've never found anybody, even though that document not only existed, but became one of the main reasons that this particular congregation was founded. As a result of that, a small group of people, I think the original number is like 190 if I'm not mistaken, broke away from Beth Israel and formed this congregation. And if you read the bylaws of the congregation, you will find a lot of the wording has to do with the right of people to the right of both the pulpit and the pew is one of the main things, okay? So my point simply is that that one of the issues that divided Reform Jews once the 1937 platform was passed, it divided Jews and created, I mean, we happen to have a specific history relates to that, but there are many stories around the country of individuals and congregations that were impacted in many ways by the change from 1885 to 1937. I don't remember the year, but I do know that at some point in time, Beth Israel did formally withdraw, overturn, I don't know what the word is, vote against, remove the basic principles from, I mean, they have it in their archives, but it's no longer an official part of Beth Israel's, of their personality, of their philosophy, of anything that has to do with them. But they did formally reject it at some point. So the question now is, what about Israel in today's world? 1948, the state is established. Nelson Glick, who was the head of the Hebrew Union College when I was ordained and who ordained me, was actually a famous archaeologist. That's what he was known for, a world-renowned archaeologist. And he decided that there needed to be a Hebrew Union College, a Reformed seminary in Israel. And so he started the Hebrew Union College in Israel, but it was not established as a seminary. It was established as a school of archaeology. He managed to pull off having a chapel. Now, he had to work a few ways around it, but the beginning of the official stance, an official place for Reform Judaism in Israel happens under the presidency of Dr. Nelson Glick. Unfortunately, I don't remember the year that it was established. Since that time, as you know, not only are all American rabbis who are all students studying to be rabbis, not only do they all go to Israel for a year to master the language, to learn the culture, to create a personal relationship with Israel. In addition to that, we now ordain Israelis as Reform rabbis, and there are several congregations in Israel, as you know. And so Reform Judaism now not only thrives in America, but has a foothold in Israel through these Reform synagogues around the country. I have to tell you that there are not a lot of them. And to this day, most Israelis, to be honest with you, have no concept of what Reform Judaism is. They either don't do anything or they're ultra-Orthodox, and if they don't do anything, if they're going to have a kid bar mitzvah, they're going to schlep him over to an Orthodox synagogue and have him but that, you know, so the whole concept of Reform Judaism, if you think about it, in some way is so American in terms of what America is, that even in Israel, where there's basically, you know, not all, but so many millions of Jews, even there in a Jewish country, Reform Judaism still doesn't make a lot of sense to most Israelis over there. They have a different culture. It's not America. It's not the same view of the world. And so if you're going to think about Reform Judaism in the 21st century, one of the challenges still remains to be able to get the message out there to Israelis who basically, many of whom are totally secular. They're Jewish by birth. They don't work on Yom Kippur because everything closes on Yom Kippur. You know, they dress up for Purim because everybody dresses up for Purim because it's a national holiday. But the sense of the Judaism, Reform Judaism, Judaism religiously is not something that's part of their mentality. Now, let's talk a little bit about Reform Judaism as it exists today here in America, excuse me, and some of the issues that we are dealing with. In 1976, there was a centenary perspective written by the Central Conference of American Rabbis. It was an official statement of the Reform movement regarding not just the Holocaust but Israel, the return to what remains really valid perennially, eternally in Judaism, and the survival of the Jewish people. And those are the kinds of issues alongside what we call social action, community involvement, that is really becoming more and more one of the definitions of where reform is. So, diversity within unity is sort of one of the concepts that they came up with in this 1976 centenary perspective. What does diversity within unity mean? It means we believe in God, but what you believe in God is up to you. We are the people Israel, but you get to be a Jew the way you want to be. We believe in the power of Torah, but we read it interpretively, not just literally, and not just as the rabbis of the of ancient times read it. Our religious obligations, each of us gets to decide for ourselves. What are we going to be obligated to do? If I feel obligated to keep kosher, then I will keep kosher. But if you don't feel obligated to keep kosher, then you have the right to make that decision, okay? The survival of Judaism, of course, is central. And the hope that Jews will feel not only a part of Judaism, but feel obligated to keep it alive. Then in 1997, in Miami, there was a Reform Judaism and Zionism centenary respective, and this recognized the first World Zionist Congress, which had been the first formal step towards establishing the State of Israel, the first CCAR platform that was dedicated exclusively to the relationship between Judaism and Zionism, and it affirms the following principles. Judaism is both a religion and a people. Now that's not what happened prior to this. Go back to Germany. We are a people who have gone from degradation, as we were treated in Europe, to sovereignty, the land of Israel. It goes on to try and define what are our obligations to the land of Israel. What are Israel's obligations to the diaspora? When we use the word redemption, which used to mean the coming of the Messiah and the coming of the kingdom of God, what do we mean by redemption in the 21st century? Again, there are several other documents that are created that attempt to refine in one way or another each and every one of these ideas. The conclusion that I sort of reach from all of this is that the essence of Reform Judaism as a religion that sees life through a progressive lens in a way is the one that defined Reform Judaism from the beginning, continues to define Reform Judaism today. The reason we sort of focused on Israel as part of that is because it shows a complete reversal from point A to point B, to show that even Reform Judaism is willing to hold up a mirror, look at itself, look at itself and say, you know, it's not Reform ED. We are not Reformed Judaism. We are Reform Judaism. Reform is an ongoing act. It doesn't stop. And so when I hear people say, oh, you belong to Reformed Judaism, that's not correct, okay? But the willingness to hold up a mirror even to the statements that we have made and the issues that we have dealt with and taken stands on, and be willing to say, look, that worked back then, but it doesn't work now. Just as the original Reformed Jews said of the orthodoxy that they had grown up with, this is no longer that world. We need to change to this. So in the same way, we are even saying, not to the Orthodox Jews, but to ourselves, we have made changes, we have progressed, and we will continue to make changes and adapt to the world as we see it. When we originally talked about doing this, the original concept was how Reform Judaism has responded to the political events, to just all the events in our lives. And you can see how even within America, the changes that have taken place have led to changes in Reform Judaism. How many of you remember Temple Emmanuel of 1970, the year that I came? Does anybody here remember that? Okay. There was not a talit in the congregation. There was not a kippah on anybody's head. Okay? And I'm going to tell you a cute story. This has nothing to do with what we prepared. I have to tell you this cute story. Okay. I'm not going to mention names, though I could. I came in 1970. In 1975, a small group of temple leaders met me in the south lobby of the temple and said to me, we'd like to talk to you, Rabbi, about the possibility of, when Rabbi Khan retires, of you becoming our new senior rabbi. I was blown away, and I said, I'd love to talk about it. I can still picture the people sitting around the table, okay? One of the women, this is 1975, she was from, I've forgotten what small town in Texas she was from, so I'm going to give you her accent and everything. She said to me, now, Roy, you're going to be my rabbi. And in my temple, we don't wear no yarmulkes. And we don't wear no talises. So if you're going to be my rabbi, you ain't going to be wearing no talises, and you ain't going to be wearing no kippahs, no talises and yarmulkes. Now, walk in Temple Emmanuel today, right? We put talisim out, right? We put kippah out. And it's not just this temple. Reform Judaism is a constantly growing, changing, and the best word for me is evolving set of ideas and principles and Judaism. And so when you look back at the history of Reform Judaism and you look at who we are now, if you just look from in the 20th century, from 1933 really, until today, the major changes that have taken place both philosophically and practically and in terms of Jewish practice, all of this has taken place within about a century. And so it's unbelievable to realize the importance of a congregation that's willing to look at itself, a movement that's willing to look at itself and say, this is who we were, this is who we are, what do we want to be? What does to move actively into the future, not just let the future drag you into it. And this is not in the script. I have to tell you, I could not be happier or prouder of Rabbi Hayon and this amazing staff. The way in which they are leading this temple into the 21st century is just amazing. They get it. They're on top of it, and we are moving in that direction. It's amazing. And I think it's just who we are as a movement, and I think they just capture it so great to keep the vision forward, not backward.
Thank you so much. This has been all of this and so much more. Thank you all so much for spending this hour of learning with us. And we wish you all a Gemar Chatima Tova.